I want to welcome everybody. I might as well get started. And, you can always stop as we go to our first in a series of the Common Fund Data Ecosystem public webinar series. And I'm really excited to be here. I'm part of the Knowledge Center. My name is Noelle Burt. You'll hear a little bit more about me and our team a little bit later. And I just want to get you all oriented to, webinars. Many of you join webinars, and I'm really thankful for you joining us on a Friday for a webinar. This is going to be a classic webinar, but we do want this to be interactive. You can pop your questions in the chat or a Q&A or raise your hand. We can unmute you and all that good stuff. And if it's anything urgent, Mackenzie's going to be monitoring the chat and the QA to make sure that we can address questions as they go so that we don't end up going too far ahead of you and you forget what you wanted to ask. So we're going to have many speakers today, and I want to start with a little bit of setting the tone for us all as we go through. So with that, I want to just sort of start with an image that I think really cleanly states our purpose and is symbolic of the Common Fund data ecosystem to me. And it's really about the fact that the reason you are all here today is because you're curious. And you're curious because you're scientists, right? And that's really the essence of what we all are doing as scientists. We are curious. And part of the reason why we're doing a public webinar series is because humans do science. And with all of our assumptions as humans, our context, our approaches, our expertise that we bring to interacting with the world, we observe it in different ways. And so our goal with these public webinars, particularly as the Knowledge Center, which you'll hear more about, is to engage with you and really understand you, because you power the discovery of all these scientific resources that we are so lucky as scientists to have at our disposal. So today you're going to hear about one purpose, which is the Common Fund Data Ecosystem, which brings together a set of resources and data repositories funded by the NIH, which George is going to speak a little bit more about in a moment, but makes them accessible to the world. But you as a user may not even know some of these exist. So our job with this public webinar and with the Knowledge Center and the other centers you're going to hear from over the course of the next year is to make that easier for you and bring that to you and actually begin a dialogue and a conversation with you as users as to in terms of what type of scientific questions could be asked with the data inside of these resources that we as generators and builders of these resources haven't even thought of yet. So this is really meant to be a conversation and a way to engage you as humans, both as users, contributors, and curious wanderers as we go through this webinar series. So today, your first foray into this will be an overview of the Common Fund data ecosystem from our colleagues at the NIH. And then you'll hear the first in a series of tours through the components of the data ecosystem. And we call these data coordinating centers, or DCCs. So you'll be hearing from the metabolomics workbench later today, really in the focus of what this resource is, but then how it fits in the broader ecosystem and how we might, as a community with you all, find new and exciting ways to analyze data from these various DCCs. And then the last part of our conversation today will be an initial glimpse as to how we hope to expose you and work directly with you, the wider scientific community, on what scientific questions and ideally discovery is possible within this system. And this is really, to me, the sort of a challenge in all of online science, if you will, these days. As a scientist, 15 years ago, we weren't all using lots of resources. We were maybe using one or two of them in our daily lives, but now they're everywhere. And I think sometimes it feels a little overwhelming to know what resources are out there, which ones to use, or yourself. You're using so many in your daily work that it feels a little bit like exhausting. We want to make that simpler with this webinar series and with the tools that the Common Fund Data Ecosystem is building. So with that, I'm going to stop and pull it over to our colleagues at the NIH. Actually, I think I'm running your slides, right? Right. Yep. So that's great. That makes it easier. And I will switch sides. Like, George, would you like to introduce yourself while I get your slides up and running?
Good afternoon. I'm George Papanicolaou, the program leader for the Common Fund Data Ecosystem, or CFDE. In our presentation, I'll provide some background of NIH's Common Fund, managed by the Office of Scientific Coordination and the Office of the Director, and then a description of Phase 1 of CFDE. Following that, Christy will be talking about Phase 2, which we are currently implementing and where to find our funding opportunities. This slide outlines the features of Common Fund programs and the types of activities pursued by our programs to catalyze biomedical discovery. Some important features of Common Fund programs include substantial investments ranging from tens of to hundreds of millions of dollars. They are designed to achieve a series of ambitious goals within 10 years, and they are intended to have a significant impact on an area of biomedical research. Our programs do the following in ways that no other entity is likely to or able to do. One is accelerating emerging science. For example, our Human Microbiome Project expanded the field of microbiome research by leveraging recent advances in sequencing to characterize the microbiomes of healthy adults on a scale never before possible. Two, enhance the biomedical research workforce. For example, our Diversity Program Consortium is testing new ways of recruiting and retaining diverse populations into the biomedical research workforce. Next, remove research roadblocks. For example, our transformative cryo-electron microscopy program is making state-of-the-art cryo-EM equipment and training available to the research community to broaden the use of this game-changing technology. And then, finally, support high-risk, high-reward science. For example, our HRHR research program supports exceptionally creative scientists pursuing highly innovative research with the potential for broad impact in biomedical, behavioral, or social sciences within the NIH mission. This support includes 2 initiatives for early career investigators. Next slide, please. Certain criteria that need to be met to ensure that the programs are suitable for common fund support. These programs should have a high impact and create new research or clinical care approaches. Next, the program must have a defined goal and deliverables that can be achieved within 5 to 10 years. The output of these programs should enable the mission of the multiple ICs or institutes and centers and be cross-cutting, addressing complex issues that require trans-NIH teams to design and manage. There must be a reason why strategic coordination is required. And finally, these programs should provide new solutions to specific challenges and not be something that another entity would be able or likely to support. If there are similar efforts, the Common Fund program should be tightly coordinated to prevent duplication of effort. Next slide. The NIH Common Fund is a collaborative endeavor and requires input and effort by many members of the biomedical research and NIH communities. During strategic planning, we gather diverse input from NIH leadership, staff, and the broad biomedical research community. This includes identifying potential new Common Fund programs and shaping and refining new program ideas once they are selected. We assemble consortia of multidisciplinary, innovative researchers collaborating to tackle a shared ambitious goal. The time-limited and goal-directed nature of our programs makes a collective effort and diverse expertise necessary for success. We manage our programs in partnership with you. Each Common Fund program is run by trans-NIH working groups with leadership provided by a few ICs. Directors from these ICs or senior staff serve as program co-chairs, providing leadership and guidance for our programs. These directors nominate members of their staff to serve on programs within their working groups. For example, this shows how we work across NIH. Dental was a lead IC for the Human Microbiome Project and works with us to administer some of our high-risk, high-reward research programs. NIAMS is a lead IC for MotorPack, which is one of our Common Fund programs. Next slide. Here we see how Common Fund programs are aligned within 3 general categories, reflecting their mission and expected outcomes. On the top left, we have our transformational science and discovery programs. These programs are designed to establish new scientific principles, models, and research resources that will transform scientific knowledge and pathways to discovery. Examples include 4DN, xRNA, and MotorPack. On the top right, we have Reengineering the Research Enterprise programs that are designed to transform how we do biomedical research and behavioral research, how we make the biomedical workforce as robust as possible to ensure new perspectives and ideas contribute to discovery, how we transition that research into prevention and therapies, and finally, how those successful prevention and therapies can be shared broadly. Examples include COMPASS and the Undiagnosed Diseases Network. Last but not least, we have catalytic data resource programs. These programs are designed to manage and develop data for scientific discoveries by accelerating research through data resources. Examples include Bridge to AI, Kids First, and of course, my favorite, CFDE. Next slide. So CFD's mission is to foster scientific discovery through the use and reuse of data and resources generated by Common Fund programs. We have 3 aims. Enable users to search multiple Common Fund data sets and use them together. Provide training and outreach to help people work with Common Fund data in the cloud, and to coordinate and integrate infrastructure and activities to create a cohesive ecosystem. To our right, you can see the elements of the ecosystem. Data consumers interact primarily in the top half, and data producers are represented in CFDE as data coordinating centers, or DCCs, for each common fund program on the bottom. Note within the ecosystem, individuals can be data consumers and producers. And through CFDE, we funded and enriched both halves through research, products, and data integration and discovery. One of the conditions of many of our awards is that generated products and harmonization and integration need to be shared with the greater scientific community, as well as parent common fund programs that generated the data. Next slide, please. So where is CFD today? So CFD has existed for approximately 4 years. As we're currently in the transition of phase 1 to phase 2, let me give a bit of background. During the pilot phase, CFD was organized into a hub and spoke model, which consisted of a single coordinating center and engaged common fund program DCCs that participated by submitting metadata to the dataset catalog, performing fairness assessments, and partnering to integrate data and create digital resources across common fund programs. To the right of the slide, you can see the hub and spoke model and the various common fund program DCCs that are currently part of CFDE. And DCCs have brought in data that include molecular associations with health and disease, cell scale anatomy atlases, and drug effects on cells and genes. An exciting part of CFDE has been supporting data reuse and trans common fund integration through 42 research awards, which are classified as RO3s to enhance the utility and use of common fund datasets. We have a new round that you can see later via a QR code that Christy will present, and that represents all of our funding opportunities. Note that all this effort is only made possible due to the efforts of the various centers, the DCCs, and the entire Common Fund Data Ecosystem team, who you'll be meeting in future webinars. I'm pleased to hand over the presentation to Dr. Christy Kano, the program manager of CFDE, who will talk about the exciting changes in phase 2.
Great, thanks, George. Next slide. Yeah, one more, thanks. Okay, so I thought I would spend a moment just talking about kind of how we're going to be structured as we move into phase 2, which officially kicked off about 6 months ago in October. And then I'll talk a little bit about kind of what we're trying to do and what the goals are for phase 2, what we're trying to achieve. So the primary structural change as we move into phase 2 is that we're moving away from one centralized coordinating center to a group of 5 distinct but interconnected centers, each that has a sort of a unique domain. 4 of those 5 centers are kind of technical in nature, so I'll talk about each one in turn. And then I'll talk about the last one. So the first one is the Data Resource Center. So its job is really to set up sort of our program landing page, the place where you can go to learn about all things CFDE, house information about all of our participating common fund programs, and all the different activities that we have going on within the ecosystem. In addition to the sort of what we're calling the information portal, or like the landing page, our framework for the program, they're also building a data resource portal where you'll be able to come in and query for data across common fund programs. They're also building out sort of a variety of tools and resources that will link to that data and provide you with resources to help use the data. The next center is the Knowledge Center, and they're similarly, but a little bit different. They're creating a portal that will allow you to go in and search for knowledge that's been generated by participating programs. So with both of these, the output is sort of a portal that allows you to come in and kind of search across participating programs. Hopefully we will have joining us very soon in the next 6 months or so 2 new centers, the first of which is the Training Center. So their task will be to coordinate training across the ecosystem. So they will not be necessarily developing or delivering all of our trainings, but they'll be coordinating all of the training activity and helping us fill in the gaps as we go. And the fourth center is the Cloud Workspace Implementation Center. Again, hoping to stand this one up pretty soon here in the next 6 months or so. And it will provide a cloud workspace where users can import data, common fund data, as well as other types of data, and analyze it in the cloud. The final center is the Integration and Coordination Center, and it's a little bit less technical. Its primary focus is really on ensuring that we have cohesion across the program as a whole. They're also tasked with responsibilities around evaluation and sustainability. The role of the DCCs that are participating will remain largely the same as we move into phase two. That is, they'll continue to contribute their metadata, as well as help us build the tools and resources that will help make Common Fund data more interoperable and reusable. We do hope, though, and we expect that the number of participating programs will continue to increase in phase two, and that it will include some new data types that aren't currently represented within the portal. Next slide. Okay, so how are we building the data ecosystem in phase two? So an ecosystem is defined as a biological community of interacting organisms and the physical environment. So I think the most important part of any ecosystem is the people. So one of the things that we're really going to be focusing on phase two is raising awareness for CFDE among the community and the great resources that we have to provide that will help users make use of Common Fund data. In terms of the sort of physical environment, if you will, that's really the products that we're going to be building, and I'll talk about those in just a moment. And then last thing we're trying to do in phase two is really start to the extent that we're able, sort of systematize some of the processes that are involved in making sure that data can be shared and reused easily, even after Common Fund programs have ended. So I'll spend just a moment talking about each of these sort of three areas in turn. Next slide. Okay, people. So as I mentioned, one of the primary goals is to help make people aware of the different resources that we have that we're going to be providing for the community that will help them take advantage of the great data sets and resources that have been generated by Common Fund programs. So this is going to include things like community building events, like hackathons and workshops, conferences, presentations, et cetera. In addition to that, we also want to make sure that the community has the resources it needs to make effective use of those tools. So we'll be offering a lot of training and mentoring opportunities. We're hoping to provide a diverse array of trainings, so both in the format that we offer it, online and in person, as well as to like a diverse group of audience. So we really want to bring in a wide variety of users, from people who are maybe primarily bench scientists, don't have a lot of computational expertise, making sure they have the skills that they need to start to reuse some Common Fund data, as well as some trainings for more advanced users that maybe have a computational background so that they can take best advantage of the resources that the Common Fund has to offer. So those are kind of our two main emphases in terms of the people and the community in phase two. Next slide. Okay, so in terms of products, I kind of think about the products that we're developing in sort of two main buckets, if you will. The first bucket of tools are tools that help make the data and the knowledge from Common Fund programs more findable, so helping to connect users with the data, resource, or knowledge that they need. So those include things like the CFDE portal, where you can go to learn about the program and the participating programs, the data research portal, where you can go in and search for data, as well as like tools that will help you make best use of that data. And then the knowledge portal, where you can go in and search for knowledge that's been generated by participating programs. So in addition to these tools that help make it more findable, we'll also have a variety of tools that are going to help harmonize disparate data sets and help users analyze the data in a meaningful way. Lastly, we're also, as I mentioned, hoping to develop a cloud workspace where users can import Common Fund data alongside their own data or data from any other program and do their analysis in the cloud. Next slide.
Christy, we also have a great question, which I think is totally, it's actually, I'll read it out loud. This is from Hunter. The current R03 funding mechanism requires integration of 2 CF repositories. That's a bit short-sighted. Why not require 2 or more repositories or knowledge bases, one of which is the CFDE data? I think that's an interesting question. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm sorry. So is this the R03 program that you're talking about, or?
Yeah, that's what he was asking a question about.
Yeah, so I think it's a great idea. I absolutely think it's something we will consider in future rounds. I think, our primary objective is really to make sure that we're driving sort of novel reuse of Common Fund programs. But I think your point about, can and should we start to require, either more than two programs or the incorporation of, data sets and resources outside of Common Fund. That's a great point, and definitely something we'll be thinking about as we move forward.
Great.
Any other questions
And then George is going to type an answer to that. That's really good. And Hunter has a great point, which is you need integration of CF without outside resources as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I don't know if, one of the things we haven't had a chance to speak about just yet, but so we have what we call a partnership program where it's so in the past it was, three or more common fund programs coming together to submit a proposal about how they would like build a tool or a resource or harmonize data sets that pulled resources from three or more common fund programs. And one of the requirements we incorporated into our most recent funding announcement back in 2023 was a requirement to include a non-common fund group or collaborator. I don't think we went so far as to specify that you had to incorporate a non-common fund resource or data set, but the idea is that, we totally hear you that like at some point, for these things to be really useful, it's going to be helpful to integrate them with the sort of broader ecosystem of resources that exist outside of common fund. And so that was kind of our intent in making that requirement that you had to have a non-common fund collaborator as part of that partnership project. But I think your point is well made.
Yeah, and I'll just echo that, Hunter, one of the things you'll hear hopefully later is at the Knowledge Center, one of the things we're really hoping to do is figure out and work with people just like you who have ideas on what we could incorporate, because some of these analyses are not super costly, right? Because they already exist. And with a little bit of effort, you don't need a huge, a year of R01, R03 funding. You can actually do it with, a little intrepid investigators like yourself who are interested in doing an analysis. And then we could immediately make those accessible in the Knowledge Center. So that's something that we really hope to achieve over the course of the next 5 years with the research community. So with that, I'll turn it back to Christy.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Great questions and great feedback. So thank you. Okay, so last thing is process. So, during the pilot phase, we did some exploration around sort of, thinking about sort of life cycles. But I think as we move into phase 2, we're really trying to the extent that we're able, systematize some of the processes that are important for making data sharing sort of easy and sustainable. So, we'll continue our work around developing terminologies, ontologies, controlled vocabularies that make it easy to share data. Or easier to share data, as well as thinking about, how can we, are there ways that we can, best practices or sort of a life cycle process that we can adopt that makes sustainability easier. So starting to think about sustainability earlier in the life cycle and maybe having sort of a series of checkpoints as, as common fund programs execute, so that when we get to the end of the life cycle, it's not, we have a good plan in place. I think people in general are sort of thinking about sustainability right at the very beginning when when they're submitting their applications, and then right at the very end when the project is ending. And so what we're really hoping to do is think about it as a life cycle and develop a process so that when we do come to the end of a life cycle, we have sort of a plan in place that's relatively easy to execute to ensure that the data and resources generated by the program are sustainable. Next slide. Okay, so this is the slide that George mentioned where you can check out our current funding opportunities. So, check back often. We're posting new things all the time. So really encourage you to take a look at them because, we would love to have your help in building the ecosystem and participating in the ecosystem. So that is where you should go. Next slide. Okay, I think that's it for us. Thank you. George and I are happy to take any other questions that you might have.